Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another webinar in our Technology 2025 series. Today, we're going to be talking about social media and the future of engagement. And with us, we have Dr. Jeremy Lipschultz from the University of Nebraska, Omaha, where he is the lead person in the UNO Social Media Lab. And we have had the pleasure of knowing Jeremy for the past several years. I don't believe Extension is new to him. He's had an opportunity to engage with us in the past, and I know he's even partnered, I believe, with people in Extension around community development activities. So I won't take a lot of time. Jeremy can further introduce himself, but we are delighted, Jeremy, that you've joined us, and we're going to have a wonderful conversation today about social media and its future. So, Jeremy?
Hi, Dan. As we were talking about before this recording started, it's been quite an interesting ride for those of us who can remember back to the early days of computing and the nature of early bulletin board systems and even early internet browsing. It certainly has come a long way. So, social media really are just part of that evolution, in my view.
As we think about social media, I tend to go out and I look at Pew Internet Life and look at that research project, and I'm always amazed at some of the demographics. Now, in our organization, we use social media extensively, but I thought maybe you might just share with us a little bit about kind of that. What does the platform look like? What do the demographics look like? What do you think we have to look forward to in terms of that engagement platform?
Well, I think what's really changed about social media since I became involved in the early 2000s, actually, with some of our students starting to tell me about Facebook walls and also LiveJournal and some of the other sites, MySpace and the like that were already there. LinkedIn was already there pretty early on. We got into it with that, and particularly the early days of Twitter. But I think for most people, Facebook was the point of entry. And I think what really changed about social media is that we've gotten to the point now where it's really fragmented. It's as fragmented as media have ever been in our lifetime. So yes, you can reach people with Facebook. You may even be able to engage with them there. You might take the first steps in moving them in some kind of persuasive behavioral change. But the people who are really successful with social media today in 2020 are those who have a strategic framework for doing the work, those who are not afraid to work across many of these platforms to reach different demographic groups, those who are willing to have a marriage between organic free social media reach and paid promotion of posts. And I think those who are willing to test content over time, do a lot of A/B testing, look at your data and analytics and let that feed back into your decision making about what you should be doing in the future. And I think right now, those who understand and recognize the moment, which is considerably different than it was 4 or 5 weeks ago. And so that speaks to this whole issue of the need to yourself to be engaged, not only as a speaker, but perhaps more importantly as a listener. And so I think one of the first steps when developing a social media strategy and what your goals and tactics are going to be is to do a lot of listening on the platforms that you might be using. So for example, I've done a lot of listening recently on TikTok. I don't have a single post there. Now I've liked some things, I've followed some people because I'm trying to understand the narrative of that platform. And it's not going to be exactly like the others that came before it. And so with COVID-19, one of the things you might be noticing is that there are an awful lot of celebrities who are home like us, with their ability to create professional content. And they're now more competitive with some of the social media influencers who were successful before this point. So one of the things that's really interesting to me about what's happened in the last 4 or 5 weeks is it's been sort of like a fast forward. There were a lot of people thinking about all of this, but not really acting on it. We were all kind of forced pretty quickly to make some decisions. Now, you know, a lot of the early work that has happened in the last several weeks may not be our best work, but you have to fall on your face a few times, get up and learn how to do it right. So for example, we have a church in Omaha, first couple weeks doing live streaming because it's the only way they can get their service out now to the parishioners and others. The Facebook video was sideways. The first week, the audio wasn't so good, but by the third week, the video was right. By the fourth week, the audio was right. So by the time they had Easter services, it was quite good. And it was done on a tripod using an iPad. That's all they had, and the internet. I mean, that's, you know, going back to what we were talking about, the days of huge mainframe computers, that computing power in an iPad, to me, is still pretty amazing. So it's taking advantage of what is here and readily available and figuring out how your organizational strategic planning process can tie into a message strategy over social media.
That's amazing when you think about that, about what people are able to do locally. I would like to address the audience. We have about 85 people who have joined, and we're delighted that you're here. Again, we have Jeremy Lipschultz from UNO and the Media Lab there. Today is a conversation with Jeremy. And for that conversation to work, we invite you to submit your questions through chat. And I'm sure that many of you are extensive users of social media and would like to know more about it and would like to vision a bit about what the future holds. So again,
Dan, I have an assignment.
Those.
I have an assignment for our audience, okay?
All right, good.
So because I didn't do this beforehand, you can help me. Let's engage on this. What I'd like somebody to do is tweet out this link with a screenshot of a photo and tag me at JeremyHL. And I will share it on to my followers and we'll see what it does, okay?
Okay. There you go. There's your challenge, folks. And while they're doing that, oh, here comes questions. This comes from Aaron Bauer in our entomology department. And Aaron is asking the question, are there good strategies for integrating social media more into online course discussion and assignments?
That's a great question. And I think it depends upon how elaborate you want to get with this. I mean, certainly one of the things you can try out is a live chat. So we've done this with our Rural Futures partners you mentioned earlier. In the first phase of our project, one of our communities was Nebraska City, and we did a Twitter town hall meeting. It lasted about 45 minutes. We engaged some people in the community. We even had a troll or two that we engaged with, and it was a learning experience for everybody. But my students participated in that, so we had a hashtag for the event so everybody could follow it. And this is, I think, a great way to start. I would caution, if you're going to do it, structure, have ready 4 or 5 questions, numbered Q1, Q2, Q3, and so that everybody can answer with A1, A2, A3, so people can follow along with that conversation. our professional association that I'm a part of, the Association for Education and Journalism and Mass Communication, AEJMC, did a Twitter chat last week called hashtag AEJMC check-in, if you want to go look at that. And we had engagement from, I think, about 79 professors around the country. So similar to what we're doing here, we could have, as part of this event, set up a hashtag. Help make one. Go ahead and make a hashtag, right?
That's right.
And we can pick up on that on Twitter as well. So, you know, ideally you would create that in advance, let everybody know. And I think that's probably the first strategy you could employ in a class. Another strategy would be to have your students follow an influencer or follow an organizer, an organization, engage with that Twitter account. What else can I tell you? I think those are some of the early ways that you can have some fun with it. You could certainly, I think one of the things I always do with everybody I talk to, and I start every class this way, is to have them optimize and update their LinkedIn profile and then share it with our class on our Canvas discussion thread. And then I like to follow them and follow back so that we create that relational communication. Now, this is really interesting when you do it with students, because now I've been doing this for years. Some of my students are 10 years removed from the classroom, and I can see what they're up to these days. So it also builds alumni relationships as well. Facebook, we have pages on Facebook if you want to go look at these, for example. So the UNO Social Media Lab has a page where we share content and engage with people. I can show you the UNO School of Communication if you'd like to see that. One of the things we did there, you know, we had an extended 2-week spring break, and we were getting ready to come back and try to motivate students to be ready for remote learning when they had traditional classes. Our faculty got together and produced a video. So everybody sent in a line. Jodine Brownlee, our broadcast professor, edited it all together with music, and we shared that on the page. And I was just looking at those analytics last hour. It's the most successful post of the month so far. And that's interesting because social media are seasonal in a lot of ways. So typically graduation season is a real spike for activity on our School of Communication page. We're going to be having a virtual commencement and a virtual honors program, and we'll try to promote those and share those content items. I don't know that it'll be as successful as the face-to-face content that we normally share. The photographs usually are so good, and our alumni usually like to come back to the page and see what our news is on our most recent students. So there are a lot of different ways in academe that you can support this. You know, all of the conversation has been lately about Zoom video, which we've been using for a few years in the UNO Social Media Lab. And I was reminded that way back in the era that Dan and I come from, you might remember this, there was a product called See You, See Me. And it was a streaming video chat room, and you could have 6 people in that chat room, 6 panes. And it was difficult because usually we didn't have the bandwidth to sustain that very long. But the concept, you know, was there. And essentially what Zoom does is what we were doing back in the mid-1990s. It's just a whole heck of a lot easier. So I think the best thing to do as an academic is to experiment. And again, listen to your students. What do your students want to do? What are they interested in? How can you create a learning community? And that's why what I've done on Canvas with all of my assignments, and I teach an couple of online upper level classes, but we have Canvas graded discussion threads where everybody sees everybody's work and comments on everybody's work. So it's a true learning community where we're all trying to learn from each other. And you can structure assignments. For example, take a platform like TikTok. Find out how many of your students are active on TikTok and do an assignment around that. Go show us what you're following and why. What do you think, makes it interesting? So, you learn something as well as them in the process.
Jeremy, we have a question from John Feck in Omaha.
Oh, hi, John. How are you?
From your perspective, what are some of the no-nos, the real no-nos that you could caution us against?
Well, the most important aspect in getting into social media is remembering about your personal brand. You're going to develop a persona online, whether you like it or not. And it's going to be the sum of everything you do there, including everything you like, everything you share, everything you comment on, all of the engagement, as well as the content. Some people have made terrible mistakes by thinking, well, I'll just delete that tweet and it's gone. It's never gone. Everything you do here is forever, pretty much. It's archived somewhere, or somebody has taken a screenshot. So it's going to go with you for a long, long time. Now in Europe, they've introduced the right to be forgotten, which is pushing Google and other search engines to delete content. But I think it's a very difficult process and raises a lot of issues for us in our constitutional framework. At any rate, I think the most important thing is to be proactive in your personal brand, and that's why I mentioned LinkedIn. LinkedIn is presenting yourself not only in terms of an online resume, but also it's a content platform. I do blogging on LinkedIn. By the way, if you're in the 80 whatever number of people we have right now, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to hear from you and take a look at your profile and follow any content that you're creating there. So in terms of the no-nos, don't do something that you wouldn't want to come back on you 5 years later. And there certainly are a lot of examples of either immediate responses or delayed responses. In my book, Social Media Communication, I talk about the public relations professional Justine Sacco, who many years ago was in London getting ready to get on an airplane to fly to South Africa to be with family. And she said something on Twitter that a lot of people thought was a racist comment. She got on this 12-hour flight where she didn't have internet. Twitter was going crazy. There was a hashtag about her. It was a trending topic. By the time she'd gotten off that plane and made a phone call, she was fired from her job. And the New York Times followed up on her a couple of years later. It has continued to follow her. So it's something that was difficult to shake. And it was all in the moment. She tweeted something that she shouldn't have, especially as somebody who is supposed to be a PR professional. So you have to be aware of the risks, but you also have to be aware of the opportunities. And the opportunities are really clear. You can gain organic reach. You can raise awareness about something that you or your organization needs to share. You can spark engagement with your stakeholders, whether they be business customers or clients or others that you work with in the extension, for example, the people that you work with. They're an opportunity to reach younger people that way and engage with them. And then finally, there's this persuasive aspect over time. Can you lead to some desired outcome or action? But you just have to recognize that, as I said earlier, it's not always going to go the way you want it to. In fact, a lot of times it won't, but you have to stay with it. So, if you put yourself out in the public sphere like this, if we're streaming live to the world, if we are commenting on Twitter, you have to recognize that you're out there. And so you may find yourself needing to respond to people, to correct the record, whatever the case might be. but you can't just put something out there and then not listen and not engage. So while I'm getting ready to answer the next question, I'm going to go to Twitter and see what you did. I've got 6 mentions, it looks like here. Hi, Dawn. Thanks for the tweet. I will give you a retweet on that. Engaging in conversation about the future of social media and engagement this afternoon. Rex. Hello, Rex in Nebraska City. We were just talking about you, and thanks for adding the link. I'll retweet that as well. Let's see. Angie Rushman is following me and also shared the link. Thank you, Angie. So this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. You got to monitor, you got to listen, you got to make sure somebody, what are they doing and how can I sort of reinforce that? Looks like Beef Educator is following us. So this goes to the value of social media, right? It's event oriented. If you have an event, as Dan has created here, a whole series, a great series, I want to see some of the other speakers in the series, then, by sharing it on social media, we're probably going to get a bump in numbers. If we can share the recorded link later, we're going to get other people. So it's content that we're creating, and content is exactly what drives social media. So what's kind of cool about an otherwise difficult situation with COVID is with this technology, we can all be in rooms in our homes creating this cool conversation that we're having this afternoon. Anybody can do this. All you've got to do is turn on Zoom, find somebody to talk to, share it out, develop a strategy for doing that, and see what happens.
We have another question from Erin Bauer. She says, I've heard the term influencer. What does that mean exactly?
Well, I think it's a somewhat malign term now. People originally wanted to be influencers because, for example, on Instagram, fashion influencers were able to turn that into becoming a paid influencer, or someone who received free items like clothes or makeup or other things that brands wanted to share. And the theory behind it was, if we're a large multinational brand, say Nike, and we're putting out our social media feed, we'll get a lot of reach, but we don't get much else. But if a micro influencer has a social network of 1,000 people who really follow this person closely and trust that person, and we can get them to say something we want them to say, then it's going to be more effective in, for example, getting people to buy things. So that was kind of the theory behind it. The Federal Trade Commission did step in with some guidelines and actually fined some companies such as Lord & Taylor for paying influencers and giving them dresses to model and not disclosing to their audiences that there was a business relationship. So disclosure is a big aspect of being an influencer now. So that's kind of the short history. It's an ongoing aspect, but it goes to this question of who do you trust? And trust is a really important aspect to all of communication. So if you trust somebody and you follow them on these social media platforms, then there's a social responsibility on the part of that influencer, if you will, to be fair, to be accurate, and to be transparent in terms of disclosing any financial interests.
We have a question from T.L. Meyer. 6 weeks ago, what were the top 3 social media platforms to reach the most people? And has that changed since then? If so, how?
It's a good question. I haven't seen any data in the last couple of weeks on this, but in terms of the top platforms, the fastest growing platforms were Instagram and TikTok, but among the top platforms also includes ones I've spoken of already: Facebook, LinkedIn. Pinterest, actually, at one point in the rankings was number 3. So the accurate answer, I think, is it depends. It depends because it depends, again, going back to your strategy. Who are you trying to reach? And I follow someone a marketer who talked to my students last fall, Melinda Byerly, who was on LinkedIn, saying, always start with the why question. And I absolutely agreed with this in the LinkedIn post. You have to know why you're doing what you're doing before you know what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. And I think too often what happens is people say, okay, I got to have a Facebook page, without really spending the time on the why. Or I need to be on Instagram, or I need to be tweeting. But you really have to have some reason for doing that and develop a strategic framework. Now, I have a friend named Keith Quisenberry who has a social media marketing book that we've used in the past. Keith spends a lot of time talking about smart, measurable goals. And that goes to what I was speaking about earlier, the idea that we need to be able to, when we can, look at the data. And if you'd like, real quickly, let me just show our page if I can screen share, which I think I can. So this is the UNO School of Communication page. And Facebook, so if you're the manager of that page, then Facebook allows you to look at the data. Let's see here. I have to get to the top of the page though to do that. And Zoom is making this difficult. So let me see if I can get to where I need to get to. Let's see. Well, there should be a More tab, and I don't see my More tab. Don't know why that is. I saw it 10 minutes ago, because that's where your analytics are. But I can show you the post that I found on the analytics. That'd be the easiest way to do this. So we have a pretty regular strategy of sharing content. We're not afraid to share content on Facebook more than once a week from our students, from our professors, from other pages, such as our journalism pages, from our alumni. This is an alum who did a song with his brother early on, but this is the post that we did, and it's on YouTube. It was a welcome back video. It has reached 258 people organically and engaged, most interestingly, a very large 96 of those 258. And it would be even more if we natively shared the video on Facebook, but it's on YouTube. And so you go to YouTube and look at that welcome back video, and it should have some views there and likes. It has 353 views there and 13 likes. And all we did was had everybody read a line and welcome our students back.
As we return to classes this week, UNO School of Communication faculty welcome back our students.
Journalists, storytellers, and communicators have changed the course of history. And with the skills you've learned and will continue to develop, you play your important part in that history too.
So you can go back and look at that and increase our numbers as well. But the idea is we were engaging our students. We were trying to give them a little wake-up call. It was time to get back to school, get back to work. We've been through a tough, difficult time, but that the faculty were going to be with them all of the way and help them get through this crisis. So we were doing that individually as faculty members on our Canvas pages, but we also did it collectively as a group, as a social media exercise. But the why of it was we wanted to, A, engage our students and get them back into the mindset of, hey, there are several weeks of school left this spring, and then B, externally, reach people who were wondering what was going on campus.
Thank you. We have a question from Michael Berglund Reese. As you mentioned, social media is becoming more segmented Do you expect to see that trend continue?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that if you were trying to project out 5 years, 2025, I would say it's not going to be less fragmented, and it will most likely be more fragmented. Now, there always comes a point in technology where there is some collapsing of the fragmentation. I once studied the beginnings of the automotive industry at the end of the 19th century and the early part of the 20th century, and there were over 300 companies making automobiles at one point in this country, and it collapsed to, you know, a handful of companies. So we're not really sure whether social media will follow that pattern or how long it'll take.
Okay. This comes from Brad Lubin. If one is hiring for a communications person on a grant-funded center with social media responsibilities, what qualities, experience, and skills do you think are most critical?
Well, I will just tell you what I do with the social media students, and that pretty much will answer the question, I think. So on day one, we start talking about LinkedIn. I would look at a job candidate's LinkedIn profile. I would want to know that A, it's up to date, B, that there aren't any typographical errors, that C, the photograph is professional, D, that they have some content there and that it's just not a placeholder, and E, that they're active in LinkedIn, that they've built a social network. And LinkedIn will tell you, if you go to your profile, the size of your network, and they actually give you a rating about how good of a profile you have in terms of their algorithm. So I think you can judge it a little bit by how serious they are about LinkedIn, because again, it is a content platform. I would want to know that they at least have some experience and comfort level with all of the platforms, and that they have a platform or two that they consider they're very good at. So, for example, I have my largest following on Twitter. Twitter is the place where I had the most comfort level when I started with social media. And I had that because I'm a former journalist, and journalism and news came to really reside there on Twitter, or early on, 2007, 8, 9. You know, the Arab Spring, a lot of things happened that made that the place to be during those breaking news stories. But those are the questions I would ask somebody coming out of school. You know, what are your best places? What are your best sites? And what do you know? So part of it is, okay, I'm an active user, but have you been involved in a social media campaign? So my students have been involved in these Rural Futures social media campaigns. And before we were involved, connected with the Rural Futures Institute, we were working with nonprofits and small businesses as clients. So hopefully they have some background in working with a brand, could be a local brand, and developing a social media strategy and campaign. Have they worked on some kind of an event, such as a webinar, or some kind of a campaign over days and weeks of time? In the fall, we ran a campaign through the social media lab called hashtag UNO One for All. We received a small grant from Middle Tennessee State University, and the goal of the grant was to promote the First Amendment. So we developed 3 events that were social media spikes in our campaign. And the events were a panel, a First Amendment panel that coincided with Constitution Day and week in September. And then we had students participate in a First Amendment social media campaign where they had to pitch their campaign to judges in October. So the campaign was primarily as an Instagram influencer and on Twitter, but we had students go beyond that. We had a student who did a Spotify playlist of songs that promoted the First Amendment. That was great. we had students do other things that went beyond and showed initiative. So that's another aspect to it. Are they just sort of following directions, or do they come up with their own ideas? So you can ask questions like that. And if I could show you, speaking of that campaign, let me go back real quickly here and see if I can show you. Let's see here. This is what the social network looked like for our campaign. We have taken social network data that I've showed you before, Dan. We use a platform called NodeXL, which is an open source research platform for visualizing the nature of a social network. And just recently, this is brand new, so this would tell you where we're headed in the next 5 years. This is a beta right now. We are able to port the data into Microsoft Power BI, which is an interactive dashboard. So this is a visualization of the students who were in the campaign as well as audience members, right? And if we look through these real quickly, I can't make this interact the way it can, but I can show you. So we, with our campaign, had been looking for spikes, and this is actually more recent data that was created as a test, but we have it also for the December data. We were able to see kind of spikes in the data, which we had hoped would coincide with the events that we were having each month, and they tended to do that. So when we put out content, we get a social media response. We can know where tweets are coming from to the extent that some people don't set privacy settings on geolocation. So we knew that some of our tweets are coming from overseas. We know who our top influencers are, but we also know something about the hashtags and the words that we use. And we can create these visualizations that are simpler than the network maps. So you can see these are the top hashtags right now. Even though this campaign has been over since December, we keep tweeting out these maps using the hashtag, and it keeps generating new activity now related to coronavirus. And another interesting aspect of the word clouds is you see both individual accounts as well as other words or hashtags that are used in the campaign. We can have the computer roughly code sentiment. It's not perfect, but it shows us positive and negative words that are built into the system. So we don't have any negative sentiment right now based on the obvious negative words. That's a good thing. If we did have negative sentiment, we would have to go back out there and engage and try to do something about it. So all of these data tools, I think, are part of the picture because they help us better understand what's happening. So we can look at the Twitter feed itself as I was doing, and I'll check on it again now. But we can also use these tools to look at it more systematically and scientifically.
Very good. Let me, we've got a question here from Sandra Frericks. Would you have students share with the public via social media? And what she's thinking about is communicating science to the public, kind of as a real world experience.
Not sure I follow that. Are you asking would I have students use social media?
No, so she's thinking about the benefits or drawbacks of having the students engage with the public, not just with other class members on social media. There's obviously the risk of trolls, but it also gives them the real audience to communicate with and develop their communication skills.
I mean, unless everybody is going to have their accounts locked, you're going to be engaging with the world. Now, my perspective, and I think generally our perspective in the School of Communication in training journalism and media communication majors in journalism, broadcasting, public relations, advertising, and marketing, is that they're going to be public with everything they do. I see no real value in being a part of social media if you're not. So I think it's a skill that has to be developed. And so what has to happen up front is you do have to set some ground rules, and you have to work with students to know what they should do and what they shouldn't before you start. Doesn't mean they're not going to be out there and make some mistakes. Of course, they're students. When we have students work at the campus radio station, in the TV newscasts for the college newspaper, they make mistakes all the time, but that's called learning. And I think most people give students a bit of a break because they're students. And I tend to tell students, if you're going to make mistakes, this is the time to make them. Learn, and don't make them when you're a professional.
Okay. There's another question from Robert Tigner. What do you mean that our constitutional structure would be problematic for the right to be forgotten?
Well, what I mean is we have something called the First Amendment, and the Supreme Court has quite clearly articulated that the reason we have, and they've articulated this in the area of broadcast regulation, where we license broadcasters to serve the public interest, convenience, and necessity. And what the court has said is the First Amendment rights are for everybody, not just journalists. So it's the right of the audience to receive information that is paramount. That's a paraphrase of what the Supreme Court said in the Red Lion broadcasting case in 1969. So it goes back a long way. And so what I'm saying is if I'm searching Google and I'm trying to find information, it seems to me that there at least is a discussion about the rights I have to access information that is out there. Now, of course, it has to be balanced against privacy rights. And this is where it gets complicated because the Constitution didn't really speak about privacy until the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution spoke about it. And that was search and seizure and papers more in a criminal law context, right? The right of the government to enter your home. And even under common law, the king was presumed to not be able to enter your home without an invitation. So there is this interesting question that has emerged in the 21st century, which has to do with if all of my papers are online now, all of my data and information is online, then shouldn't there be some essentially common law interest in the right of protecting privacy? And some states have gone substantially further. Nebraska, unfortunately, is dragging its feet on this. The state of California basically followed the GDPR EU model and has gone pretty far in protecting data privacy. There's case law there because you might know this. The Weather Channel was doing some things with user data that they probably shouldn't have been doing, and there was a case. They went to court over that. But also, the state of Florida has fairly rigid privacy protection statutes. The federal government, though, your Congress, has not passed any national privacy law. And so short of that, we're really not quite to the point where we can know at the federal level what the balance is between the First Amendment and privacy rights. So that's why I said what I said.
Okay, we have a question from Danielle Dewis. In the short term that social media has been a thing, we've seen many platforms come and go. How do we avoid wasting precious time on a platform that won't stand the test of time while still being relevant?
Well, you learn from every platform, right? So I don't think you can say it was a waste of time if you learn something important from using a platform. Having said that, yeah, you do have to be careful with your time and you have to manage time because there is a real phenomenon known in social science called internet addiction. And if you don't manage your use of these tools, you could be on day and night, and that wouldn't be a healthy thing. I recommend a schedule, first of all. So, for example, I have a schedule of what I do over morning coffee while I'm having my breakfast. I check Twitter, I check the news wires, I check Facebook and see what's happening there. I check Instagram. I check LinkedIn. So I start with those 4 pretty basic checkpoints. And then depending upon what's out there, it might lead me to go to Snapchat, or it might lead me to go to TikTok, but not usually. I mean, I don't go to Pinterest as much as I did when it first started. Doesn't mean Pinterest isn't an important platform for some brands, but it just isn't that important in my world. It could be really important depending upon what you're doing, though, depending upon the audience. So I think, again, go back to the why of it. Why are you spending time on this particular platform? In my case, I'm on TikTok, and I usually actually do that late at night because I don't view most of what I see on TikTok as very serious, although there is some that, particularly a lot of COVID nurses and doctors posting there. I'm interested in that. But I usually am doing that very late at night, for 20 or 30 minutes, looking through what the algorithm is sending me. So, again, I think, you think about the why of it. And I mean, in my case, part of the why of it is, I'm updating, this is going to be hard to see. I'm updating the 2nd edition of Social Media Communication right now. That'll be out in June. So, obviously I have to be as up to date as I can for my next class. I have a book that came out in June of last year called Social Media Measurement and Management, which goes into all of the ins and outs of that. And I didn't really answer completely that question of what a student should know after we got past LinkedIn. I got off on a tangent, as I usually do. They should know something about Google Analytics. The students that work in my lab get certified in the basic course. We're getting certified right now on Facebook Blueprint, which teaches them how to use advertising. Advertising is really important for targeting geographically, targeting demographically, and targeting psychographically. And with a small budget, if you're really wanting to reach thousands of people with a campaign, that's how you do it. And so there are tricks to the advertising, and Facebook will teach you how to do that so that you can spend your money the most wisely and test. So, there are a lot of things you can do early on, all the way up to learning about social networks and creating your own network maps, to, however sophisticated you want to get with multivariate statistical analysis. I mean, it's like all of education. You start basic, and there are many, many steps on the ladder.
We have a question from Marissa Kemp on Facebook. What does it mean if you are a top fan?
That's something Facebook has been doing the last few months. So I'm a top fan on some news sites. It means I'm engaging somehow. I'm liking their content. I may even be sharing it somewhere. I may comment on it. It really means that you're engaging with them. And, typically engagement levels are pretty small, except for the most exceptional content. So engagement levels of less than 1% or 1% are kind of the norm on a lot of social media posts. But, they can get pretty high. They can get upwards of 25 or 30% on really good posts. And if you do that very often, then Facebook now wants to categorize you as an important person. It's really a signal to those social media managers that you better pay attention to that person who is your fan.
We have a question from Lisa Franzen Kessel. You mentioned video views, but what about looking at differences between 3s, 10s, and average view length? Sometimes it looks like a video has had a lot of views, but not many people have actually watched the full video.
Yeah, and that's important for podcasts as well, because I've seen some great data from a friend of mine in Chicago. I'll give a shout out to Charlie Meyerson, who worked with a startup that was a podcasting startup. And, they had data that showed people dropping off after the first few seconds on stories that people weren't interested in. And it helped inform them about content, that people were engaging with and interested in. So in general, short content is better than long content. So if you're doing video, half-hour videos, even 20-minute videos, not so much. if you can keep your content short. That video that we had some success with in the school was, I think, about a 1-minute video. People will stay with it. But the other important part that I learned from Charlie was, and we're both former radio news people, is that you can hook people in the first few seconds. So you go through your audio or video content. What's the most, sticky part of that content? What's the thing that somebody said that would capture people's interest? And you preview that in the first 3-4 seconds. That gets you past that point of entry and leads them to be more likely to stay on with the content. But it's really up to you, the content producer, to create engaging content. And somebody else I follow a lot on this point on social media, and have since the early days of Twitter, is Gary Vaynerchuk of VaynerMedia. Gary talks about producing hundreds and hundreds of pieces of content and learning from those to determine what works with your audience, your tribe, if you will, and what doesn't. And, there's a lot of A/B testing of content and trial and error and falling on your face before you find your voice in social media. So there's no one best practice that works for everybody. You really have to learn in your context what's going to work the best for you. And it's not static. It changes over time because these algorithms keep changing. So you could think you know what's going to work today, and all of a sudden tomorrow Facebook changes its algorithm, because that's what they do. Google does the same thing to stay ahead of the kind of what we call black hat marketers, the people that game the system. They have to keep changing it to stop that. And because of that, you have to keep changing with them.
Chairman, we've got a question from Angie Rushman. How will people's privacy and security be managed in the future? Best advice for managing this. And I just would mention that we actually got bombed here today. So I think about these things, and seems like a very timely question.
Yeah. It's a real problem with these technologies, especially once you open it up to everybody, is that you can get Zoom bombed or Twitter bombed in the process. Privacy is something that you have to take responsibility for yourself. And when I was talking earlier about being public on Twitter versus being locked as an account, you have to ultimately make the judgment how public you are wanting and willing to be, how much you're wanting to put yourself out there as a thought leader, for example, for your organization, or how much privacy is something that you value so much that you're not willing to do that. But understand this: if you have a Facebook page, even if you have your privacy settings locked down pretty hard, your cover photo and your profile photo are open to everybody. So don't put a profile photo on Facebook if you don't want it to be out there. So there are things like that you really have to think about and consider. Having said that, I think in 2020 and to your assignment, Dan, in 2025, I think it's pretty hard to not be at least a partially public person in this world. I think 20 years ago, it was a little easier to protect your privacy. But I think in the digital age, if you use these tools, you have given up on an awful lot of it. Not all of it, but an awful lot of it. And so again, it comes back to what extent are the laws going to change over time? Particularly, and that's the part that I'm most interested in, is the data privacy. My friend Mark Smith at the Social Media Research Foundation and NodeXL suggests that the model should be that of a bank. If I deposit my data with Facebook, I should have the right to take my data out of Facebook and go elsewhere with it. And I should not necessarily have to give all of my data forever to these sites that use it. I think there's a battle over that question because, again, the federal government has not really done a lot in this regard. There's more that has been done on student data privacy, health data privacy, but social media data, and this has kind of been true throughout the history of the internet, the people who make laws have been way behind what's happening with the technology. So the most obvious example is geolocation. These smartphones that we have, if we're not really careful of how we do the settings when we're downloading apps, we're broadcasting our location very precisely, and in terms of granular data, in terms of streaming data that are available by and large for marketers, but we don't know what other purposes that data may be used for. So I think, that's another thing to be aware of, is be careful about the apps. That's what happened with the Weather Channel app. Be careful. Nobody's reading the terms of service, the end user agreements. You should be, before you check it. You download the app and you click check. Yes, I understand those terms. Because usually that's an assignment I give to my law students. Usually those terms are in the favor of the company and against the user.
Well, Jeremy, we are coming up close to our 3 o'clock hour. We've got, I know, a couple more questions, but I did want to give you an opportunity. You sent me an email yesterday, and you said that your next book is focusing on social media law and ethics. And I just wondered if you might share with us what are the most salient points you're going to be addressing?
Yeah, I'm going to be spending the better part of this year working on that new book after I finish the index and proofing tomorrow on the 3rd edition of Social Media Communication. So the Law and Ethics book is the 3rd in this series. The Social Media Communication book is the introduction to the topic, and it covers basically all of what we've been talking about today. The methods measurement book is the how-to. Once you determine what you want to do and why, it's sort of how you do it and how you build strategy. And the Law and Ethics is getting at that last question, the changing legal framework that we're facing right now. And so I think there's increasing case law right now. I've mentioned already the statute laws in places like Florida and California, but also, in Illinois, there was a law that was a biometrics data law, and it led to a settlement between the Attorney General and Facebook, and everybody in the state of Illinois is getting a settlement of, I think it's a couple $100, because Facebook has been using facial recognition to tag photographs or suggest tags of photographs. And that was, accepted to violate the Illinois biometrics law. So there are aspects of that are not necessarily things that are happening in all 50 states, but are interesting harbingers probably to what you're talking about, where we're going to be in 2025. Because the question will be, here in Nebraska or over in Iowa, what are we going to do? What are our state legislatures going to do in response to what has happened in terms of other state privacy law? And will there be any federal privacy legislation? That some of that is politics. Will Congress continue to be gridlocked, or will we, move out of this coronavirus crisis and start making laws that make sense again on the other side of this, and return some level of normalcy more generally? So I think, you always have to kind of consider the political context of what's happening, but the book is going to try to take a stab at how First Amendment law developed through the course of the 20th century, and how digital rights management has impacted that here in the 21st century. So it cuts across all of the traditional First Amendment topics: defamation and libel law, pornography laws. There are questions about student speech and expression here in the 8th Circuit, the Federal Circuit here, where we've had case law. A student, for example, up in Minnesota at a community college was thrown out for his Facebook posts about what was going on in his nursing class, which were deemed by the administration to be threatening. And that decision was upheld at the Eighth Circuit. So there's student expression. There are questions about copyright law and intellectual privacy. There are questions about privacy, as we talked about. There are questions about how journalists are navigating this kind of mobile journalism smartphone era, in terms of, we've had police departments that have, taken people's equipment away from them from recording video that they wanted to post on social media. So there are so many questions. I can't name them all, but you get the idea. Because of the technology, a lot has changed, and the book is my attempt to take the social media framework that I've developed and now overlay the legal questions that are now obvious.
Well, Jeremy, I don't know if you have a few more minutes or not. There are a couple more questions, or do you need to run?
I'm happy to answer the questions.
All right, very good. We'll go on then. Here's a question from Sarah Polak. Polak, what is the next big social media platform that we should be keeping an eye on?
Well, I don't know about next. Right now, TikTok is the one that people are asking, is it going to challenge Instagram? Because Instagram rapidly became Facebook's most important property. And it continues to grow at astounding rates worldwide. And, TikTok is interesting because it has a connection to China in terms of its ownership. And so there are those kinds of questions as well. There's something called Byte from ByteDance. There are a lot of them out there kind of bubbling at kind of almost below the surface. But I think right now, I guess I would double back to Facebook and follow everything new that they are doing. Because, for example, they're doing animated photography to catch people's attention on photos. They're doing some of those kinds of things. Instagram picked up on a lot of what Snapchat was doing in terms of filtering your photos. All of these platforms have an interest in artificial intelligence and augmented reality. So I would also watch that across all the platforms. So that Pokemon Go kind of thing was sort of a test case, a use case that shows it could be more widespread than that. And some brands have done things like, allowed you to place furniture that you might want to buy in your living room. That might be really important in an era when stores are closed and you can't go look at furniture, but you might want to buy it and have it delivered to your home. This ability to virtually take a look at what that piece would look like in the corner of your living room might be valuable. So all of these trends are colliding right now, and I don't think we will maybe know until 2025 or past how the dust is going to settle. So I would be amiss to give you a crystal ball forecast. I most likely would be wrong.
And our last question I think we have of the day is, do you have a good process for curating content to utilize for social media? That comes from Dawn Lindsley.
Hi, Don. Well, I think the most curation that I personally do, I mentioned earlier that I do a lot every day on Twitter, is that, it's about following the right accounts, engaging with those accounts, and learning which content is most valuable to your audience, to your fans, if you will. And it kind of comes down to what do people come to you looking for? And I think Twitter gives me a really good example. So I continue in the mornings to share some news on Twitter because I'm a former journalist, and I've always taken the view, once a news person, always a news person. But that's not the content that people come to me for. People come to me more today as a social media professor, and they want to know information about social media. So the rules of curation involve what is your personal brand and what are people looking for from you. And so I think I would start with, take an account that you follow on that platform and ask yourself, why why is that an interesting person to follow? And what is it about that content that makes it engaging to you? I think there'll be a lesson there about number one, why you might be curating, but also what you might do beyond curation, because I don't think people should just be curating content without having their own voice. Howard Rheingold, who was the pioneer in about 1993 in Silicon Valley with the idea of virtual communities, spoke to my class several years ago, and you can look it up on YouTube. We have the video there, but he implored the students at the time, and I think it's still so true today, don't be just an audience member, create some of your own content. Be part of the community by sharing your own content there. So I think Howard would say, look at your identity, look at what you are presenting there, look at your engagement, how you are interacting with others in the platform, and then look at the nature of your community. How is that community formed, and what is it formed around? So I mentioned social networks and NodeXL. That's probably my strongest community on Twitter, is the people, the researchers around the world who are interested in using NodeXL to be part of their research, part of their engagement. And we're all a learning community. We now have a Zoom group that meets weekly, which developed actually as a positive out of the coronavirus lockdown. But a lot of it goes on in what we share. So we create a map and we share it on Twitter, and some people like the map that we created because it tags a whole bunch of people who are influencers on that social network. So, again, through daily use of a particular social media platform, you come to understand what your value proposition is as an individual. And that's what you want to maximize there. And to go back to how do you avoid #fail? Limit everything else. try to stay in your lane with what you're known for and what you're good at. And I would say discard or at least, put blinders on as if you're a horse about the stuff that you really shouldn't be engaging about. So I might have a lot of strong opinions about politics, but in general, I avoid those. It's not to say that I don't occasionally weigh in on something that's obvious, but I'm not known as somebody with strong political opinions. And actually, in fact, I generally consider myself a centrist politically. So as a centrist in a polarized political world, I keep my lane in the middle for the most part. And I find that works pretty well and generally keeps me out of trouble.
Jeremy, thank you. On behalf of everybody, we appreciate your time. We appreciate your information and your guidance. And this is recorded. It'll be available up on our page with the series. So you can go back and watch any part of this. And we have more webinars coming and on very interesting topics. And we hope you'll join. So thank you all for being here today.
Thank you, Dan. This has been great. And I look forward to the rest of the series.
Very good. Thank you.